I woke up to 2 feet of snow covering everything in sight, and my phone buzzing like an angry hornet on the nightstand. The blizzard had finally stopped after dumping what the news was calling a historic snowfall across northern Vermont. And I knew before even looking at my phone that the HOA was about to make my day miserable. My name is Gregory Quinlan, and I live in what I thought would be a peaceful mountain community called Pine Ridge Estates, just outside Burlington. When I bought my house here 3 years ago, the realtor glossed over the HOA requirements like they were no big deal. I should have known better. I should have run the moment I heard those 3 dreaded letters. The phone showed 15 missed calls and 23 text messages, all from the same number. I recognized it immediately as belonging to Patricia Hendricks, the president of our HOA and the most insufferable person I had ever encountered in my 42 years of life. She had short blonde hair that she kept in that classic speak-to-the-manager style, drove a white Lexus SUV, and possessed an uncanny ability to find violations in absolutely everything. I scrolled through the messages with growing irritation. Each one was more demanding than the last, starting with polite requests and escalating into what could only be described as orders. The gist was simple. Because I owned a truck with a plow attachment, the HOA expected me to clear all the community roads before I did anything else, including my own driveway. That last part made me laugh out loud. The audacity was truly something to behold. I had bought the plow attachment last year after getting stuck at the end of my driveway during a smaller storm. It cost me $3,000, and I installed it myself over a weekend, watching YouTube videos and cursing my way through the process. It was my property, my investment, and I used it for my convenience. Nowhere in the HOA bylaws did it say that owning snow removal equipment obligated me to become the community's personal snowplow service. The phone rang again. Patricia. I let it go to voicemail. I made coffee and stood at my kitchen window, looking out at the pristine white landscape. My driveway was buried under 2 feet of powder, and so was everyone else's. The main community road that connected all 12 houses in Pine Ridge Estates was completely impassable. The county plow would eventually get to our private road, but it would probably be tomorrow or the day after. Until then, we were on our own. My phone rang again. Still Patricia. I ignored it and took my coffee to the living room, turning on the news to see the extent of the storm damage. The governor had declared a state of emergency. Schools were closed. Most businesses were shut down. The meteorologist was calling it the biggest December snowstorm in 40 years. Another call. Another ignore. Then came a text message that actually made my blood pressure spike. Gregory, this is a direct violation of community standards. The HOA meeting last month clearly established that residents with snow removal equipment are required to assist in clearing common areas during weather emergencies. Your refusal to comply will result in fines starting at $500 per day until you fulfill your obligations. I read it 3 times, trying to process the sheer insanity. I had missed that HOA meeting because I was visiting my sister in Boston. I never received any official notice about policy changes, and I certainly never agreed to become an unpaid municipal worker. I pulled out my copy of the HOA bylaws from my desk drawer. It was a thick document, painfully boring, but I had read it cover to cover when I first moved in. I skimmed through the sections on snow removal and found exactly what I remembered. The HOA was responsible for arranging snow removal of common areas, and homeowners were responsible for their own driveways and walkways. Nothing about mandatory equipment sharing. Nothing about forced labor. The phone rang again. I picked up this time. "What?" I said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Gregory, thank God," Patricia said in that voice that always sounded like she was talking to a particularly slow child. "Did you get my messages? We need you to start on Cedar Lane first, then move to Maple Drive and finish with no," I interrupted, silence on the other end. Then, "Excuse me," I said, "no. I am not plowing community roads. I am going to plow my own driveway, and that's it." "Gregory, we discussed this at the meeting." Everyone agreed. "I was not at that meeting, Patricia. And even if I was, you cannot force me to use my personal property for community service. That's not how any of this works." Her voice took on that sharp edge I had heard her use with other residents. "The bylaws were amended. You would know that if you bothered to attend meetings. Bylaws cannot be amended without proper notice to all residents and a majority vote. Did you send certified letters? Did you follow the amendment procedures outlined in Article 12? Another pause. Shorter this time. "We sent emails." Emails are not legally sufficient for bylaw amendments, and you know it. I checked my spam folder anyway. Nothing there. "Gregory, do not make this difficult. The community needs the community can hire a plow service like normal HOAs do. In fact, I seem to remember paying $200 in quarterly dues. What exactly is that money being used for if not snow removal? That's not the point. You have the equipment right there. It's selfish to—" "Patricia, I am hanging up now. Do not call me again about this." I ended the call before she could respond. My hand was shaking slightly, adrenaline mixing with the caffeine. I hated confrontation, always had, but something about Patricia brought out a stubbornness in me that I did not even know I possessed. The phone immediately started ringing again. I turned it off completely and finished my coffee in peace. Around noon, I bundled up in my winter gear and headed out to the garage. My truck sat there waiting, a Ford F-250 that had served me well through 3 Vermont winters. The plow attachment was already installed from the previous week when we'd had a smaller storm. I checked the hydraulics, made sure everything was functioning properly, and fired up the engine. The truck roared to life, and I felt a small surge of satisfaction. I was going to clear my driveway, make it absolutely perfect, and then I was going to park my truck back in the garage and ignore every single call from the HOA. I started at the top of my driveway where it met the community road. The plow blade cut through the snow like butter, pushing it to the sides in great white waves. It took me about 45 minutes to clear the entire length, which curved down a slight hill before reaching my garage. When I finished, my driveway looked like a picture from a winter magazine, perfectly cleared with neat snow banks on either side. I also cleared the area around my garage and the walkway to my front door. Then, just because I was feeling petty, I cleared a nice wide area in front of my house so I could park multiple vehicles if I wanted. The whole project took about 2 hours, and by the time I finished, I was warm despite the freezing temperature. As I was backing the truck into the garage, I saw Patricia's white Lexus struggling to make it down the community road. She had not gotten far from her house, which was about 300 yards from mine. The SUV was slipping and sliding, clearly not equipped with proper winter tires. I watched for a moment, making sure she was not in actual danger, but she managed to rock the vehicle backward and retreat to her driveway. I closed the garage door and went inside. The rest of the day passed quietly. I made lunch, caught up on some work emails, and actually enjoyed the forced isolation. My job as a software consultant allowed me to work remotely most of the time, so being snowed in was not a huge problem. I had food, power, and internet. Life was good. Around 5 in the evening, I turned my phone back on. It practically exploded with notifications. 47 missed calls, 63 text messages, and now there were emails too, all from Patricia or other HOA board members. I skimmed through them with growing amazement. The messages had evolved from demanding to threatening to what could only be described as unhinged. Patricia claimed I was endangering the community. Another board member, Robert Chen, said my actions constituted a breach of my purchase agreement. A third person, whose name I did not even recognize, said I should be ashamed of myself. Then I saw the real kicker, an email from Patricia with the subject line, "Notice of fine." I opened it and read through the official-looking document she had attached. According to this notice, I was being fined $500 per day, starting immediately, for failure to maintain community standards during a weather emergency and refusal to cooperate with HOA emergency protocols. The fine would continue until I complied with the directive to plow all community roads. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud, sitting there in my living room. The sheer audacity of it was almost admirable. Patricia had essentially decided to extort me for refusing to provide free labor using equipment I purchased with my own money. I forwarded the email to my lawyer. I should mention that I have a lawyer on retainer for my business, a sharp woman named Deanna Morrison who worked out of a firm in Burlington. She specialized in contract law, but had helped me with various issues over the years. I explained the situation in a brief message and asked her to review the HOA bylaws and the supposed amendments Patricia was claiming gave them authority to commandeer my equipment. Diana responded within an hour, which surprised me given it was a Friday evening after a major snowstorm. "This is absolutely insane," her email read. "There's no legal basis for any of this. The bylaw amendments they're claiming don't exist in any official capacity. I checked the county records. Nothing was filed. And even if they had properly amended the bylaws, they can't force you to use personal property for community service. That's not how property law works. Sit tight. I'll draft a response." I felt vindicated but also increasingly annoyed. This whole situation was stupid. Patricia was manufacturing an emergency to justify her power trip. And now, I was going to have to pay legal fees to defend myself against completely baseless accusations. The weekend passed in a blur of increasingly hostile communications from the HOA. Saturday morning brought a new tactic. They started having other residents call me. People I barely knew were leaving voicemails about how their elderly parents could not get out, how someone needed to get to a doctor's appointment, how I was being selfish and cruel. I felt bad about the elderly parents and the doctor's appointment, I really did. But that was not my responsibility. The HOA collected dues specifically to handle this kind of situation. If they had not budgeted for emergency snow removal, that was their failure, not mine. By Sunday morning, the county plow had finally made it to our area. I heard the rumble of the big truck and watched from my window as it cleared the main community road. The plow pushed through like it was nothing, the 2 feet of snow no match for its industrial-grade equipment. Within an hour, the road was passable and residents could get in and out if they needed to. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Monday morning brought a certified letter delivered by a very tired-looking postal worker who had clearly been working overtime to catch up after the storm. The letter was from the HOA's attorney, a guy named Mitchell Graves who worked at some small firm in town. The letter demanded immediate payment of $1,500, representing 3 days of fines at $500 per day. It also demanded that I sign an agreement promising to plow community roads during any future snow events. If I failed to comply within 7 business days, they would place a lien on my property. a lien on my property. For refusing to be their unpaid snowplow operator, I called Deanna immediately. "They're bluffing," she said after I read her the letter. "They can't place a lien without going through proper legal channels, and no judge would approve this. It's harassment, plain and simple. I'm going to draft a response that will make them think twice about continuing this nonsense." "What should I do in the meantime?" I asked. "Nothing. Don't pay them anything. Don't sign anything. And whatever you do, don't plow those roads. If you give in now, they'll think they can bully you into anything." I took her advice. I ignored the letter, ignored the increasingly frantic phone calls, and went about my business. The weather had cleared up nicely, and the roads were fine now that the county had done its job. Wednesday brought another twist. I came home from a grocery run to find a notice taped to my front door. This one was not about fines or liens. This one claimed that I was in violation of the HOA's good neighbor policy, and that a hearing would be held on Friday evening to discuss my continued residence in Pine Ridge Estates. My continued residence. They were threatening to kick me out of my own house. I took a photo of the notice and sent it to Deanna. She called me back within minutes, and I could hear the anger in her voice. "This has crossed a line," she said. "They can't evict you from your property. That's not how HOAs work. Even in extreme cases where someone is genuinely violating serious rules, the process involves fines, liens, and eventually foreclosure if the person refuses to pay legitimate debts. You can't just kick someone out because you don't like them." This is getting into harassment territory, possibly even intentional infliction of emotional distress. "So what do we do?" I asked. "You're going to that hearing and I'm coming with you. We're going to put an end to this right now." Friday evening arrived cold and clear. The hearing was scheduled for 7 p.m. at Patricia's house, which served as the unofficial HOA meeting location. I arrived with Deanna at exactly 7, both of us dressed professionally. Deanna carried a briefcase that I knew contained copies of the bylaws, relevant property law statutes, and a cease and desist letter she had prepared. Patricia answered the door with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Gregory, thank you for coming. And you brought a guest." "This is Diana Morrison, my attorney," I said. The smile vanished. "This is a community meeting. We don't need lawyers. If you're discussing my continued residence in my own home, then yes, we absolutely need lawyers," Deanna said calmly. "May we come in?" Patricia looked like she wanted to refuse, but she stepped aside. Her living room had been arranged with chairs in a semicircle. The other board members were already there. Robert Chen, looking uncomfortable in a button-down shirt, Margaret Foster, an older woman who usually kept to herself, and Travis Wilmington, a guy about my age who had always seemed reasonable in the past. "Let's begin," Patricia said, taking the center seat. "We're here to discuss Gregory Quinlan's repeated violations of community standards and his refusal to cooperate with emergency protocols. His behavior during last week's snowstorm was unacceptable and endangered residents." "Before you continue," Deanna interrupted, "I need to clarify something. What emergency protocols? I've reviewed the HOA bylaws filed with the county, and there's no mention of any requirement for residents to provide snow removal services." "We amended the bylaws at our November meeting," Patricia said. "No, you didn't," Deanna replied. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a document. "According to Vermont property law and your own governing documents, bylaw amendments require 30 days written notice to all residents via certified mail, followed by a vote requiring 2/3 majority approval. The amendments must then be filed with the county clerk's office within 90 days. None of that happened. We sent emails," Robert said weakly. Emails are insufficient for legal notice regarding property rights, Deanna said. You know this, or at least your attorney should have told you this before you started down this path. Patricia's face was turning red. The point is that Gregory refused to help his neighbors during an emergency. He has the equipment to clear the roads, and he chose to only clear his own driveway. That's selfish and against the spirit of our community. The spirit of the community doesn't override property law, Deanna said. My client purchased snow removal equipment with his own funds for his own use. You cannot compel him to provide free labor using his personal property. That's not how any of this works. He pays HOA dues, Margaret spoke up. Those dues include snow removal. Then use the dues to hire a snow removal service, Deanna said. That's what HOA dues are for. You can't collect money for a service and then force residents to provide that service themselves. The room fell silent. I could see Travis and Robert exchanging glances. Margaret was staring at her hands. Only Patricia maintained her defiant expression. Furthermore, Deanna continued, the fines you've attempted to levy are completely baseless. The notices of lien are without legal foundation. And this meeting tonight, threatening my client's continued residence, constitutes harassment. I have prepared a cease and desist letter that I'm serving right now. She pulled out several copies of a letter and handed one to each board member. I watched their faces as they read. Travis looked relieved. Robert looked sick. Margaret just looked confused. Patricia looked furious. You can't intimidate us with legal threats, Patricia said. I'm not intimidating anyone, Deanna replied. I'm informing you of the legal reality. If you continue this harassment, my client will file a lawsuit for intentional infliction of emotional distress, harassment, and possibly defamation given some of the messages sent to other residents about his character. We'll also file a complaint with the State Attorney General's office regarding HOA abuse. Vermont takes these matters seriously. We're just trying to maintain community standards, Patricia said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. Then maintain them within the law, Deanna said. My client has violated no rules. He's paid his dues on time. He maintains his property. He's done nothing wrong except refuse to be bullied into providing free labor. This ends now. I watched Patricia's face cycle through several emotions before settling on cold anger. Fine. This meeting is adjourned. We left without another word. Deanna walked me to my truck, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. That went well, she said, did it? Patricia looked ready to murder me. She's angry because she knows she's wrong. The other board members looked uncomfortable because they probably never wanted to go this far in the first place. She pushed this agenda, and now it's falling apart. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a change in HOA leadership soon. I hope she was right, but I had my doubts. Patricia seemed like the type to double down rather than admit defeat. The next week proved me correct. The harassment did not stop, it just changed form. Patricia started filing noise complaints about my truck. She claimed I was running it at all hours of the night, disturbing the peace. This was completely false, but it meant I had to deal with the local police showing up twice to investigate. Both times, the officers were apologetic and clearly saw through the complaints, but they still had to follow up on reported violations. The second officer, a guy named Tom Bradley who I recognized from the local coffee shop, actually pulled me aside and gave me some advice. Look, I can't tell you what to do, he said, but I've dealt with HOA situations before. Document everything. Keep records of all communications, all complaints, everything. If this escalates to the point where you need to take legal action, you'll want that paper trail. I took his advice seriously. I started keeping a detailed log of every interaction with the HOA. Deanna had already been saving all the emails and letters, but now I added notes about the phone calls, the police complaints, everything. The log grew distressingly long. Then Patricia found a new angle. She started claiming that my Plow attachment was not properly registered, and that storing it constituted running a business from my home, which violated the residential zoning. This required me to prove to the zoning board that I was not, in fact, running a snow removal business. That meant gathering receipts, showing that I had never been paid for plowing anyone else's property, and attending a zoning hearing. Diana accompanied me to that hearing too. The zoning officer, a patient man named Earl Stevens, listened to Patricia's complaint and then reviewed my documentation. The whole thing took about 15 minutes before he ruled in my favor. "Miss Hendricks," Earl said, "owning snow removal equipment does not constitute running a business. By that logic, anyone who owns a lawnmower would be guilty of operating a landscaping business. Mr. Quinlan has provided ample evidence that he uses this equipment solely for personal purposes. This complaint is dismissed." Patricia stormed out of the hearing without another word. I thought maybe that would finally be the end of it. I should have known better. The final escalation came in early January. I returned home from visiting my sister in Boston to find that someone had damaged my Plow attachment. The hydraulic lines had been cut, rendering the system useless. The damage was clearly intentional, done with bolt cutters or something similar. I called the police immediately. This time, it was not a noise complaint or a nuisance call. This was property damage, a crime. Officer Bradley responded to the call along with another officer I did not recognize. They examined the damage, took photos, and asked questions about who might have access to my garage. "It was locked," I said, "but the door has a window. Someone could have reached through and unlocked it from the inside. Any security cameras?" Bradley asked. "No, but I'm definitely installing some now." They took my statement and said they would investigate. I knew what they were thinking. Everyone knew about my ongoing dispute with the HOA. Patricia was the obvious suspect, but proving it would be another matter entirely. The repair estimate came to $1,200. I filed an insurance claim, but my deductible meant I was still out of pocket $500. More importantly, I was angry. This had gone beyond petty harassment. This was criminal destruction of property. Diana's advice was clear. File a civil lawsuit. Sue the HOA and Patricia personally for harassment and property damage. Even if we can't prove she did the damage herself, we can prove the pattern of harassment that led to this escalating situation. I was hesitant. Lawsuits meant time, money, and stress. I had already spent hours dealing with this nonsense, and now I was looking at potentially years of litigation. Or, Deanna continued, we can use the threat of a lawsuit to force a settlement. The HOA has liability insurance. Their insurance company will not want to defend this case because they'll lose. Patricia has created a documented pattern of harassment over a completely baseless grievance. Any reasonable mediator will see that. That approach made more sense to me. I was not looking for revenge. I just wanted to be left alone. Diana sent a demand letter to the HOA's insurance company, laying out the entire situation with meticulous documentation. The letter demanded compensation for my damaged property, reimbursement for legal fees, and a binding agreement that the HOA would cease all harassment immediately. The response came surprisingly quickly. The insurance company's lawyer called Diana within a week. I was not privy to those negotiations, but Diana kept me updated. The insurance company was apparently furious with Patricia and the board. They saw this as a completely indefensible situation that their client had created through sheer stubbornness and poor judgment. 2 weeks later, Deanna called me with news. They're offering a settlement, full reimbursement for your plow repairs, $5,000 for your legal fees and general damages, and a binding agreement that prohibits the HOA from taking any adverse action against you. They're also forcing Patricia to step down as HOA president. She's stepping down. I could barely believe it. The insurance company is requiring it as part of the settlement. They won't continue coverage if she remains in leadership. The board can either accept that or find new insurance, which will be impossible once this situation becomes known in the industry. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I'll take it. The settlement was finalized by the end of January. Patricia officially resigned as HOA president at a special meeting I did not attend. Travis Wilmington took over as interim president and immediately sent out an email to all residents apologizing for the situation and promising better governance going forward. The settlement check arrived in early February. I used part of it to repair my plow and the rest to install a proper security system around my house, including cameras covering all entrances and my garage. I was not taking any chances on future harassment. Patricia's white Lexus left Pine Ridge Estates in mid-February. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she and her husband were moving to a condo in Burlington, somewhere without an HOA, ironically enough. I did not attend her going-away gathering, such as it was. I figured my presence would only cause drama. The new HOA board under Travis's leadership was remarkably different. They hired a professional property management company to handle routine matters like snow removal. They sent out proper notices for meetings via certified mail. They actually followed the bylaws instead of making up rules as they went along. In March, Travis stopped by my house with a 6-pack of beer and an apology. "I should have stood up to Patricia sooner," he said. "We were sitting on my back deck, enjoying an unseasonably warm afternoon. I knew what she was doing was wrong, but I went along with it because it was easier than confronting her. That's on me." "You stood up when it mattered," I said. "Most people would not have even done that. Still, the whole thing was ridiculous. You bought equipment for yourself, and she tried to turn you into the community servant. That's not how this is supposed to work." We drank our beers and talked about normal things, football and work and plans for the summer. It felt good to have a normal conversation with a neighbor, without any underlying tension or agenda. The rest of the spring and summer passed peacefully. The HOA functioned like it was supposed to, handling common area maintenance and organizing the occasional neighborhood barbecue without turning into a totalitarian regime. I actually started to enjoy living in Pine Ridge Estates again. The following winter brought another major snowstorm in December, almost exactly a year after the original incident. This time, I watched from my window as a professional plow service cleared the community roads at 6 in the morning, well before most people needed to leave for work. The HOA had contracted with them for the entire winter season, exactly as they should have done all along. I still cleared my own driveway with my repaired plow attachment. It took me about an hour, and I enjoyed the peaceful morning, the sound of my truck's engine rumbling, the satisfaction of seeing the cleared pavement behind me. No one called to demand that I plow their roads. No one sent threatening letters or notices of fines. No one damaged my property. It was just a normal winter morning in Vermont, the way it should have been from the start. Sometimes I see Patricia around Burlington. We do not acknowledge each other. She has her life and I have mine, and there's no reason for our paths to cross anymore. I heard she joined the condo board at her new building, which made me feel a little sorry for her new neighbors, but that was not my problem anymore. The whole experience taught me several valuable lessons. First, HOAs are only as good or as bad as the people running them. Second, documentation is everything when dealing with any kind of dispute. Third, having a good lawyer on retainer is worth every penny. And fourth, standing up to bullies, even when it is uncomfortable and stressful, is sometimes the only option. I still live in Pine Ridge Estates. My house is paid down, my property is well maintained, and I get along fine with my neighbors. The HOA functions properly under competent leadership. And my Plow attachment sits in my garage, ready for the next storm, serving exactly the purpose I bought it for. Clearing my own driveway, on my own schedule, using my own equipment. Last month, I attended an HOA meeting for the first time in over a year. They were voting on whether to install speed bumps on the community road. I voted yes, participated in a civil discussion about placement and cost, and left feeling like I had actually contributed to my community in a positive way. That is what HOAs are supposed to be about. Neighbors working together to maintain common property and solve shared problems. Not power-hungry presidents trying to commandeer personal property and bully residents into unpaid labor. As I sit here now, looking out at my perfectly cleared driveway after this morning's snow, I feel satisfied. Not smug, not vindictive, just satisfied. I fought back against unreasonable demands. I stood my ground when I was right, and I came out the other side with my principles intact and my property secure. The phone on my desk has not rung with HOA demands in over a year. My email inbox contains only routine community updates and meeting minutes. My security cameras show nothing more exciting than the occasional deer wandering through my yard. Life is peaceful, exactly as it should be. And if another major snowstorm hits tomorrow, I will do exactly what I did before. I will fire up my truck, clear my driveway with the equipment I purchased with my own money, and let the professional plow service that the HOA actually pays for handle the community roads, because that is what makes sense. That is what is fair. And that is what I will continue to do, no matter what. The whole ordeal cost me thousands in legal fees, even with the settlement and months of stress that I will never get back. But it was worth it to establish the principle that HOA membership does not mean surrendering your rights or your property to the whims of petty tyrants. Other residents have thanked me privately for standing up to Patricia. Apparently, I was not the only one she had targeted with unreasonable demands and threats. My resistance gave others the courage to push back on other issues, leading to the overall improvement in how the HOA operates now. That is another unexpected lesson. Sometimes standing up for yourself ends up helping others too. The ripple effects of refusing to be bullied can extend far beyond your own situation. Diana and I have stayed in touch beyond just a professional relationship. She occasionally invites me to dinner parties where I have met other interesting people dealing with their own unique legal challenges. It is nice to have expanded my social circle, even if it came about through such a frustrating situation. My sister called me a hero when I told her the whole story, which made me laugh. I am not a hero. I am just a guy who refused to let someone push him around over something completely unreasonable. If that makes me a hero, then the bar has gotten very low, but I appreciate the sentiment. And I appreciate living in a place where property rights are protected, and legal systems exist to resolve disputes without violence or chaos. For all its flaws, the system worked. It took time and money and effort, but it worked. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had just given in that first day. If I had hooked up my plow and cleared the community roads like Patricia demanded. Would she have left me alone after that? Or would she have found other ways to exercise power, other demands to make, other situations where she could flex her authority? I suspect it would have been the latter. People like Patricia do not stop when you give them what they want. They just escalate, finding new demands and new ways to exert control. Giving in would have set a precedent that I was someone who could be pushed around, and that would have made me a target for every future ridiculous request. So I am glad I stood my ground from the beginning. It was harder in the short term but better in the long run. The legal settlement included a confidentiality clause, so I cannot discuss the specific terms publicly. But I can say that justice was served in its own slow and bureaucratic way. The insurance company's intervention was probably the key factor. They had no interest in defending the indefensible, and their financial pressure on the HOA board accomplished what reason and law had failed to achieve on their own. I have thought about writing up this experience as a cautionary tale for people considering buying homes in HOA communities, but I probably will not. It is my story to tell, but it is also behind me now, and I would rather focus on the present than constantly rehash the past. The present is good. The winter is beautiful. My house is warm. My driveway is clear, and I am at peace with my neighbors and my community. That is all anyone can really ask for. When spring comes, I will remove the plow attachment and store it for the season. I will mow my lawn and tend my garden and enjoy the warm weather. The HOA will organize a community yard sale, and I might participate or I might not, depending on my mood. Either way, no one will fine me or threaten me or make my choice into a federal case. That is freedom. Real, practical, everyday freedom. The freedom to make reasonable choices about your own property without interference from small-minded bureaucrats on power trips. It is a freedom worth fighting for, even when the fight is exhausting and expensive and seemingly endless. So that is my story. It started with a snowstorm and a demand I could not accept, and it ended with justice served and a community improved. Along the way, I learned things about standing up for yourself, about how legal systems work, and about the importance of documentation and good legal counsel. But mostly, I learned that sometimes the right thing to do is also the hard thing to do, and you just have to accept that and push through anyway. Because the alternative, giving in to unreasonable demands just to avoid conflict, is ultimately worse for everyone involved. My truck sits in the garage, ready for the next storm. My plow attachment is maintained and functional. My security cameras watch over everything, and I sleep well at night knowing that I stood up for what was right, even when it would have been easier to just go along. That is enough for me. That is more than enough.